couple nights ago, the WNBA had their annual draft. It was by far the biggest draft in WNBA history. I'm not just talking about talent. I'm talking about the level of attention that this draft got. And of course, the reason why the level of attention was so high was because Caitlyn Clark, perhaps the most celebrated women's basketball player in college in a generation, was there. Angel Reese, perhaps the most beloved and famous uh, women's college basketball player in the hood in urban America, and really maybe the second most famous in the world, right? And the second most celebrated in the world right now from college, was in the draft. And a bunch of other people were in the draft as well. We had the center from USC. We had a bunch of folk who were in the draft. And this was a celebrated class, a talented class. But despite all that talent, despite all of that celebration, the fact is these women are not going to be paid a reasonable sum for their efforts. They're not going to get the money that they deserve. Women athletes in general don't get the money they deserve, but WNBA players are right at the top of that list. The reason we're even having a conversation about WNBA players is because Caitlyn Clark, and I'm just gonna be honest with you. Some of y'all gonna say I'm wrong. Some of y'all gonna say I'm just loving the white woman like on some Uncle Ruckus stuff. But the fact of the matter is, the reason we're talking about women's basketball right now is because of Caitlyn Clark. And Caitlyn Clark, despite being maybe the best college player we've ever seen, I mean, there's Cheryl Miller, there's Maya Moore, there's a bunch, Cheryl Swoops, there's some legends there, but she's certainly the best of her generation. She's certainly the hottest prospect we've seen in a long time. And when we look at Caitlyn Clark's salary, and I'm using her as an example because she's the #1 draft pick, and in the NBA and in the WNBA, you get paid to scale. It's not like the old days where each player had to negotiate their own deal. If you're the #1 pick in the draft, you're going to make the most. It's just a fact. And Caitlyn Clark, this is her deal right here. I'm going to show y'all Caitlyn Clark's deal because I don't want y'all to think that I'm being dramatic or hyperbolic. She's the #1 pick in the draft. The #1 pick in the draft. There's nobody in front of her. There's no doubt in the world that she is the best player. There was no dispute about whether she was going to be #1. There was no dispute about whether she deserved to be #1. There was no conversation. There was not one person in the world who said, you know, Caitlyn Clark may not be worth all this bread. No, every single person who watched Caitlyn Clark play said, you know what, she is her. She is her. And when we look at her salary, let's look at it. She got a 4-year deal. Caitlyn Clark's deal is for 4 years. $76,535 the first year. Year 2, $78,000. Year 3, $85,000. Year 4, which is an option year, $97,000. So in her 4th year, she'll be making $97,582. The whole contract, the entire contract is only worth, I mean, say only, there's a whole lot of people who would kill for that type of money. I'm not disrespecting anybody who's a working class person or a middle class person, right? People go to college, I know first year professors that didn't make this much, and a teacher should make more than a basketball player in my mind in general. So I'm not dissing anybody who makes less than this, but what I am saying is, when you think of pro basketball, this ain't the numbers that you think about. And the reason why these numbers are so stunning, in my mind, I'm going to pull up something else just to give you a point of comparison. I ain't got no fancy stats for this. I'm just going to show you old school numbers. Okay, so I want y'all to look at this. This is the salary of Victor Wembanyama. Sorry, my computer's tripping. Victor Wembanyama. He's the #1 draft pick of the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA this past year. His first year at 20, he's going to make $12,160,680 in his first year. In his fourth year, he's going to make $16,864,000. There are 2 club options here. So his deal, his overall deal, is worth $55,174,766. That means, just doing some basic math here. Let me pull up my calculator, because I don't want to sound like I'm being dramatico. Victor Wembanyama makes $148,300 a game per game. So that means that he's going to make more today, playing today, than Caitlyn Clark is going to make in the next 2 years. Victor Wembanyama is absolutely a big prospect. He's absolutely an extraordinary basketball player, one of the best prospects we've ever seen. But I would argue Caitlyn Clark is just as big a prospect in her sport as he is in his. If not exactly, they're in the same conversation. Victor Wembanyama is a generational talent. Caitlyn Clark, I think, is a generational talent, but they're in the same neighborhood. Someone just wrote higher salary in WNBA is barely $250 a year. Minimum salary in NBA is over $1 million. Yeah, that's fair. I don't know if the $1 million is exact minimum salary, but I think for veterans it is. But the point is, yeah, they're apples and oranges. They're simply, there's just no excuse for the pay disparity. Now, I know what some of y'all are going to say, because I've been hearing it all the time. Well, the WNBA doesn't make enough money. The WNBA doesn't earn enough money to justify paying them more. There are NBA players who say that. There are everyday men who say that. And they say the women get what they deserve. If more people watch the WNBA, then they would get more bread. Well, first of all, y'all caping for billionaires. I promise you, there is not an NBA or WNBA owner that is down to their last dollar. They all pay as little as possible. That's why they have strikes. That's why they have lockouts. That's why they have long negotiations, because the athletes want to make the most, and the athletes want and the owners want to pay the least, right? So please miss me with this whole idea that the owners are doing the best they can in the WNBA, and if only the women could generate more money, they'd be fine. That's what they tell you every year. That's what your boss tells you too. Right? If only we could make a little more money as a company, we could give you a raise. You deserve the raise. You want the raise. So let's not suddenly start echoing billionaires when they ask for more money, because it's funny. And some of this is not even gender based. Sometimes when NBA players say they need more money or they want more money, a lot of y'all be like, they make enough. And it's like, I get why you might not be riding with the 1%. But when you reject the athlete's demand for more money, you're rejecting their 1% requests in the interest of the 0.00001%. In other words, yeah, you're saying these millionaires don't need more money, but the money that they're not getting is going to the billionaires. But when it comes to the women, it's not just billionaires who are cheating millionaires. This is billionaires who won't even let them be thousandaires, 100,000aires. This is a problem. And people say, well, if people watch the league, you can't expect people to make money. You can't expect people to make money if their bosses aren't making enough money. Well, here's the thing. The NBA in the 1970s, and shout out to Jamel Hill, she broke this down way better than I ever could. But in the 1970s, the NBA was not making money. The NBA was going bankrupt. This is back still when the ABA was still doing its thing and the NBA was trying to do its thing and the leagues were split and people weren't watching NBA like that. The athletes weren't athleting. They were doing coke and drinking beers at halftime. Before Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, the NBA was not doing well. And yet still they paid their players. The average player's salary in 1970-ish was the equivalent of $245,000 a year. I'm gonna say that again. The if you index for inflation, the average NBA salary back then, the average NBA salary back then was $240,000 a year. The equivalent of them. Be very clear because I don't want y'all. I know y'all be like on some well actually on Twitter, right? Y'all love a good well actually. I'm saying very clearly that it's the equivalent of it, right? When you index for inflation, it's very clear that the NBA players are being paid a lot of money. And what makes that a problem is that the league wasn't making any, but they believed that if they invested in male athletes, if they invested in the NBA, they would generate a better product, they'd get better athletes, more people would eventually watch. It takes money to make money. But when it comes to the WNBA, they don't do that. They don't do that. They don't do that. They decide that they can just pretend that nobody watches it so we don't have to pay you. The idea that nobody watches the WNBA is a lie. It is a myth. People watch the WNBA. In fact, the WNBA is peaking right now. Since COVID, people have been watching this. And again, read the work of Jamel Hill. Follow her. She even left some comments on my IG earlier that breaks this down again way better than I could. But the WNBA has viewership. Now, a lot of times people look at the stands and say, well, look, there's not a million people in the stands. Let me tell you something. The stands ain't the only game in town. See who's watching on NBA. People say not enough ticket sales. Ticket sales aren't the only measure. What about who watches on TV? Did you know since COVID, WNBA numbers have peaked? And in fact, when they air on ESPN and ABC, they do just as well as hockey. So the NHL and the WNBA are doing about the same. But no one's like, well, don't pay the hockey players. No, I agree. The more money you make, the more money you can spend. So yeah, as more people go to the stands, more people get season tickets, as they get better TV deals, etc., the league will do even better. But right now is the time to invest. Angel Reese and Caitlyn Clark are stars. They are stars. They are Magic and Larry. And the league is going to grow, but you got to invest in it. Now, some of y'all say, well, that's what Caitlyn Clark had a chance to make money. No, listen, Caitlyn Clark is going to make money. Her endorsements, her advertising, her marketing, all that stuff is going to get her paid. I'm not worried about her. But I'm worried about the person who's not the number one pick in the draft. I'm worried about the sister who might be the number 30 pick in the draft, who's going to make $30,000 or $40,000 a year. And those people, in order to make ends meet, they also have to go overseas to play for part of the year. So that's how you end up with Brittany Griner in Russia getting locked up, because they have to travel all over the world to play a sport that their country is supposed to be the leader of. If you pay them what they're worth, you won't have to do this. That is a reality. That is a necessity, I think. And people say, well, she could have went to the big three. Why? She should not have to play in a men's 3-on-3 league in the summer instead of playing in her league in order to make a living. Shout out to Ice Cube. I thought he made a great offer. I thought he made a great business deal. But if Caitlyn Clark or anybody else goes to the big three, it just reinforces the idea that they can't make money in the WNBA. And again, I'd love for the big three to thrive. I'd love for them women to play over in the big three when it makes sense, if it makes sense. I have some basketball issues with it. But fundamentally, this shouldn't be the thing.